This is my true story. I was a father who gave my daughter everything: my money, my time, my love. I worked, I sacrificed, and I believed she would honor me in return. But one night, in front of her friends, she turned me into a joke. She laughed at me, pointed at me, and called me useless. My heart broke that night, but I did not stay broken. I rose from the pain, and what I did next ended her future forever. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is, and please subscribe now. I was not born with money. I came from a poor house where every coin mattered. When I became a man, I swore my family would never suffer like I did. I worked when others slept. I carried weight until my back almost broke. I stood in the factory, the office, and on the farm. My hands turned hard, my legs turned weak, but I never stopped. Every meal my daughter ate came from my sweat. Every dress she wore came from the hours I lost. I gave her the best schools. I paid every bill. I covered every mistake. When she wanted music lessons, I paid. When she wanted trips, I paid. When she wanted a wedding that shined, I paid. She never saw the nights I came home late. She never saw the times I went without food so she could eat. She never saw the way I counted coins just to make her future safe. I believed she was my pride. I told everyone, my daughter will never suffer. I wanted her life to be soft, because mine was not. I built my life around her. Even when she grew older, I still paid for everything. Rent, bills, clothes, car, comfort, all came from me. She had no fear of hunger because I took it all. She had no fear of darkness because I kept the lights on. I was her shield, her roof, her foundation. But sacrifice is heavy. It takes years away. My body bent. My knees ached. My health broke. Still I gave. Because I thought that love meant giving without limit. I thought a child would remember the father who bled for her. I thought she would honor me when I could not stand as strong as before. I was wrong. She never thanked me. She never looked at me with respect. To her, I became background. The man who paid but never mattered. The man she saw not as strength, but as weakness. When I asked for a little help, she rolled her eyes. When I asked for company, she gave silence. She forgot the years when I carried her in my arms, when I stayed awake during her fevers, when I stood proud at her school doors. She forgot that her comfort came from my hunger, her joy came from my pain. A father's sacrifice should mean something, but to her, it meant nothing. I had given her everything, my time, my money, my soul. But one day, I learned the truth. Sacrifice without respect becomes waste. And that night, in front of her friends, she showed me how little my years meant. She spat on all I had done, she laughed at me, and with one word, useless, she tried to erase my life. But she forgot something. The man she called useless was still the man who held her future. The signs did not come all at once. Cruelty never starts with a knife. It begins with little cuts, the ones you almost ignore. At first, it was her tone. I would ask a simple question, and her answer was sharp, like I was wasting her time. I told myself she was tired, maybe busy, maybe stressed. But then it happened again, and again. Her eyes grew cold when she looked at me. No warmth, no respect, just impatience. She stopped calling me unless she needed something. The phone that once rang with "Dad, can you help me?" now stayed silent. She no longer visited unless I brought money or gifts. Birthdays, holidays, ordinary days. They were not about family anymore. They were about what I could give. I began to notice the roll of her eyes when I spoke. Small, quick, like I was annoying her. When I told a story from my past, she sighed. When I asked about her life, she gave short answers, like I was a stranger and not her father. Every time I tried to share a moment, she built a wall between us. It grew worse with time. She stopped introducing me with pride. Instead of saying, "This is my father who worked hard for me," she said nothing. Or she said it with no feeling, like my presence embarrassed her. When I walked into a room, she sometimes looked away, as if she wished I had not come. I saw the cruelty in her silence, too. She would sit with her friends, laughing, joking, sharing stories. And I would be there in the corner, invisible. I was no longer part of her life. I was just an old man taking space. The child I once carried on my shoulders now acted like my voice was noise. It is strange how a father can feel small in front of his own child. I had once been the strongest man in her world. Now she treated me as weak, useless, a burden. She never said it out loud at first, but her looks, her tone, her actions, they all carried the message. One day, I asked her for help fixing a small thing in the house, just moving a chair. She snapped, "Do it yourself." "I'm busy." "Busy doing what?" "Scrolling on her phone." I stood there in silence, realizing she would rather waste time than help her father. Another day, I asked if she wanted to eat dinner with me. She shook her head and said, "I already ate." Later, I saw the food wrappers in the trash. She had ordered for herself, but never thought to include me. That cut deeper than she knew. The first signs of cruelty are easy to ignore. I told myself, she is just young. She will change. She will remember. But deep inside, I knew something was breaking. Respect was gone. Love was turning into contempt. And still, I stayed quiet. I carried the pain in silence, because I thought maybe it was just a phase. I thought maybe she would wake up one day and remember who I was. But the truth is, once a child loses respect for a parent, it rarely comes back. I had sacrificed everything for her, and she had already begun to erase me. The moment that broke me did not happen in silence. It happened in front of strangers, in front of her friends, in a place where she wanted me to be nothing more than a joke. She invited them over for dinner. I thought it was family. I thought it was togetherness. I sat at the table, quiet, trying not to disturb them. I believed I was still her father. I believed that maybe this was my chance to feel included. At first, the conversation was normal. They laughed about work, about friends, about parties. I did not say much. I listened. That is what old men do. We listen. But then one of her friends asked me a question, small and harmless. Before I could answer, my daughter leaned forward and said, "Don't bother. He's useless." The words hit harder than any punch. Useless. She said it like it was fact, like it was my name. The room froze for a second, and then her friends laughed. Not small laughs, but loud laughs. They looked at me the way people look at trash left on the floor. I sat still, my face burning, my chest tight, my heart breaking. She did not stop there. She smiled as if it was entertainment. She added, "He just sits around. He can't do anything. He's old and weak." Every word cut me deeper. Every laugh in the room was a knife. I had worked decades to give her life, and now she turned me into a clown for strangers. I wanted to speak, but my throat closed. My hands shook under the table. I thought of the nights I worked until my back screamed just to buy her gifts. I thought of the days I went without food so she could eat. I thought of the years I spent building the life she now showed off to her friends, and now she used me as a weapon for her own amusement. The humiliation was complete. It was not private. It was not a mistake. It was deliberate. She wanted her friends to laugh. She wanted me to feel small. She wanted to prove that in her world, I was nothing. I sat there in silence while their laughter circled the room like wolves. Every sound echoed in my ears. My dignity, my pride, my love, all crushed in that moment. I was not her father anymore. I was her joke. That night, something inside me changed. Pain became anger. Anger became resolve. She thought she could erase me with a single word. She thought one laugh could undo a lifetime. She thought useless was the truth. But she forgot who I really was. She forgot that the man she mocked still held the pen that wrote her future. After that night, I carried the pain inside me like a stone. I did not scream. I did not fight. I did not answer her in front of her friends. I sat frozen, with the laughter still cutting my ears, and I stayed quiet. But inside, I was breaking. When I went back to my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about my life. I thought about the long nights I worked to pay for her school fees. I thought about the hours I ruined my back carrying heavy loads so she could have a better future. I thought about the times I stood in line to pay bills while skipping meals myself. Every birthday cake, every holiday trip, every gift she wanted, all of it came from me. And yet, in front of her friends, she called me useless. The silence that followed me was louder than the words. I did not sleep that night. I kept hearing her voice in my head. Useless. I could not erase it. It stayed, sharp, burning into me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face laughing, her friends pointing, their eyes looking at me like I was nothing. I tried to eat the next day, but food had no taste. I sat at the table alone, my hand shaking as I held the spoon. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had no place in my own house. The walls felt cold. The air felt heavy. Even when the sun came through the window, it gave me no warmth. I remembered when she was little, how she used to sit on my shoulders, laughing, pointing at the sky. I remembered when she called me her hero, when she hugged me after every small win in her life. That child was gone. In her place stood a woman who mocked the same man that gave her everything. The pain grew in silence. I could not tell anyone. Who would listen? People think fathers are strong, unbreakable. They do not see the tears we hide. They do not hear the way the heart shatters when respect is gone. I carried it alone. But silence is dangerous. It builds pressure. It turns love into grief, grief into rage. Every memory of sacrifice became poisoned. Every happy moment from the past now looked like a waste. I asked myself, was it worth it? All those years? All that work? All that love? And the answer was bitter. I gave her everything. In return, she gave me shame. The laughter of that night followed me everywhere. In the kitchen, in the hallway, in my dreams. I was no longer her father in my own mind. I was a man who had been erased by his own blood. That silence taught me something. Words can destroy more than fists. Mockery can cut deeper than knives. And sometimes, the people you love most are the ones who bury you alive while you are still breathing. But while I carried that pain, I also began to see the truth. She thought I was powerless. She thought I had no worth. She thought I had no voice. She was wrong. Because silence is not weakness. Silence is waiting. And I was waiting for the moment to show her that the man she called useless still had power she could not imagine. She believed her words erased me. She thought calling me useless in front of her friends would make me small forever. She thought age made me powerless. But she forgot something. She forgot that I was still the man who built everything she enjoyed. She forgot that I was still the one who signed every paper, held every account, and controlled every piece of the future she counted on. Money does not come from nothing. Comfort does not fall from the sky. The house she lived in, the car she drove, the clothes she wore, all of them came from my hand. Every corner of her life was tied to the work I did, the choices I made, the sacrifices I endured. She thought she could mock me and still inherit everything. She thought my silence meant weakness, but my silence was control. I still had the will. I still had the power of law. I still had the pen that decided where every dollar of my $3.1 million estate would go. She had forgotten that the man she mocked was the man whose name was on every paper. She forgot that the father she laughed at was the same man whose decision could erase her future in a single stroke. She laughed with her friends that night, but I knew something she did not. Every laugh cost her more than she could see. Every insult she threw dug her grave in my will. She thought I was useless, but I was the one who still held the key to her dreams. What she thought was weakness was actually strength. What she thought was silence was actually planning. She forgot that a father's love can turn to a father's judgment, and a father's judgment can turn to iron law. I sat in my room after that night, and instead of feeling broken, I started to see clearly. She believed she had stripped me of value. But the truth was the opposite. I was still in control. She depended on me more than she ever admitted. Her future was tied to the inheritance she expected. She counted on my money for her comfort, her social life, her security. She thought it was hers already. But it wasn't. It was mine. And I was not done yet. The man she called useless was the one who could destroy everything she relied on with a single decision. The man she mocked still had more power than she could ever understand, and I was ready to use it. That night, after the laughter died and the house went quiet, I sat alone in the dark. I did not feel like a father anymore. I felt like a man who had been mocked, used, and thrown aside. The word useless still rang in my ears, but it no longer hurt the same way. It started to change. It turned into fuel. Pain became anger. Anger became resolve. I realized I had a choice. I could continue to sit quietly, accept her cruelty, and wait for death while she counted the money she believed was hers. Or I could stand up in silence, not with fists, not with shouting, but with something colder, something final, something she could never undo. That was the night I made my decision. I would not beg her for respect. I would not cry for love. I would not fight her friends or demand an apology. I would act in a way that would cut deeper than her words ever cut me. She wanted to humiliate me in public. I would humiliate her in life. She thought her future was secure. She thought $3.1 million was already in her hands. She thought my will was permanent, untouchable, written in stone. But she forgot that I was alive. She forgot that the pen was still in my hand, and I was ready to use it. I decided to erase her, not with violence, not with shouting, not with anger, but with the law. With the stroke of a pen, I would make her name disappear from everything she counted on. I would take away the inheritance she believed was hers. I would take away the comfort she thought was waiting. I would take away the safety net she mocked me for providing. That night, my heart turned cold. I told myself, she will learn. She will feel what disrespect costs. She will see what happens when you spit on the hands that built your life. It was not a quick decision. It was not a moment of rage. It was calm, steady, and absolute. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and once I decided, I felt no fear, no regret, only clarity. The humiliation she gave me would be returned, not in words, but in silence. She would discover it too late. By the time she realized what I had done, her future would already be destroyed. That night, I became something else. Not just a father, not just an old man. I became her lesson. The next morning, I woke early and did not eat. I dressed slow, with hands that trembled but a mind that was clear. I did not call her. I did not confront her. I walked to my car and drove to the law office like any other man going about his day. My feet did not shake now. The hurt was still there, but it sat behind a new calm, the calm of a plan. I entered the lawyer's room and sat down. The lawyer knew me. He had been my guide for years. He knew about the house, the accounts, and the way I kept record of everything I owned. He waited. I told him what happened at the dinner. I told him the words she used. I did not shout. I did not beg. I spoke slow and plain. I said, "She called me useless." He listened, his pen quiet. I watched his face and saw no pity. He was a man of law, not of feeling. That suited me. Feeling would not fix what needed fixing. Paper would. Law would. I asked him to bring the will we signed years ago. It was a long document, written in careful legal language. Her name was there. My bank accounts, my house, my small business, all had notes about what would happen when I was gone. For years that paper had given her confidence. For years she had assumed everything was settled. She believed I would never change it. She believed my silence was consent. She believed wrong. I told the lawyer to prepare a new will, not a draft, a final binding change. I gave him clear orders. Remove her name. Replace it with the names of charities and distant relatives who had never hurt me, and with people who had shown respect. If she had wanted control of my estate, she should have shown respect when I was alive. I told him to make the changes absolute. No conditional gifts. No small clauses that could be argued in court. I wanted the language iron strong. I wanted it sealed in a way that left no easy path back. The lawyer raised questions about tax, about executors, about possible challenges. I answered them like a man signing his fate. Appoint an executor I trust, I said. Choose witnesses who will stand in court. Put in a no contest clause that strips any challenger of inheritance if they fight. Make the distribution to people who will honor me, not people who used me. I told him to include precise details, account numbers, property descriptions, titles, so nothing could be twisted. He nodded and began to write. He worked with the steady hands of someone who knows paper can change the future. I watched every word. I wanted to know what I was leaving and who would get it instead of her. When the first draft came, I read every line. The legal words felt cold and final. Her name was gone in the first version. Where once it had been, the will now named Charities, a nephew who visited, an old friend who had always respected me, and a small fund to help workers who had given years of service like I had. I signed where the lawyer told me. I signed slowly, feeling the weight of the pen. Each stroke felt like closing a chapter that she had burned with her laughter. I put my thumbprint where it belonged. I did not feel lighter. I felt like a man who had done what he had to do. We notarized the will that same day. The lawyer arranged witnesses who had no reason to lie. He told me about the no contest clause and how it would work. If anyone challenged the will and lost, they would lose everything. That was important. I did not want empty threats or courtroom drama that might drag out the pain. I wanted finality. I wanted the truth to be clear and the consequences to be real. He explained the time it would take for banks to process and for deeds to be updated. I did not argue. I knew these things were slow. I knew life moves at its own pace. But the change was legal and binding. The document carried my decision. I left the office with a copy in my pocket and a sealed original in the lawyer's safe. After that, I took steps to secure my accounts. I moved certain funds into trusts. I put property into a holding company that matched the new will's terms. The lawyer advised me on executors and alerted me to possible future claims. I followed his advice without question. I did not want a fight. I wanted a clean end, no loopholes, no back doors. If she chose to fight, the law would be on the side of the paper I had signed and the witnesses who saw me sign it. If she tried to manipulate people, the no contest clause would punish her. The law could be cruel in the right hands. I used it that day. Word spread slowly at first. I did not tell her. I did not send a message. I let the legal system do its work. The change was not secret forever. Friends, relatives, and the neighbors would talk when the will took effect or when I updated the house deed. But I wanted the moment of discovery to be hers alone when she first asked about her future and found silence where promises had been. I wanted her to learn the weight of words at the same cold speed she used them in front of her friends. Some people asked me later if I felt guilty. Others said I was cruel. They did not know the nights I spent counting coins, the years of sacrifice, the slow erosion of respect. They did not know how a single word could take a man and make him small in his own home. I did not answer them. I had made my choice. I had used the law because the law cannot be laughed at in a crowded room. It responds to ink and witnesses and signed pages. The lawyer had given me tools to make the change final. I used them. I would not relive humiliation by begging for apology. I would not trade dignity for a broken promise. I signed the papers and left the rest to fate and the courts if necessary. That night I went home and sat in my chair. The house felt different. Not empty, but quiet. I felt no joy and no triumph. I felt the steady knowledge that I had done what I thought right for myself. The execution of my decision was complete. The will was changed. The papers were filed. The law had my handprint. Whatever came next would be for the world to see. Whatever she would say, whatever she would beg, the truth of that day would stand on paper and in witnesses. I had acted with purpose. The man she called useless had taken control of his legacy. The execution was done. I did not tell her about the new will. I went back to my routine and said nothing. I wanted her to discover it in her own time. It did not take long. She came to me one afternoon, her tone different now. She had been talking with her friends about plans, about investments, about the house she thought would be hers one day. She came into my room and asked a casual question about the papers. I looked at her and said nothing. She asked again, a little sharper. I still said nothing. That silence was the beginning of her education. She started calling the lawyer herself. He told her nothing because he owed her nothing. She came back angry. "Did you change something?" she demanded. I only looked at her. She started to panic. The confidence she had before, the smugness, the mocking tone, began to crack. Her voice trembled. She raised it, but it was not power now. It was fear. She knew something was wrong. When she finally saw the new papers with her own eyes, it was like a slap. Her name was gone. All the things she thought belonged to her, the accounts, the property, the business, the investments, were gone from her column. She read the new names. She saw the charities. She saw the old friend, the nephew, the workers' fund. She saw that everything she mocked had been redirected to hands that respected me. Her face changed. The arrogance fell. What replaced it was a mix of rage and shock. She did not laugh now. She did not point now. She stared at me as if she was seeing a stranger. At first she shouted. She said I was unfair. She said I was cruel. She said I was destroying her life. I did not answer. She asked me to explain. I did not answer. She begged me to change it back. I still did not answer. The more she spoke, the quieter I became. She had used words to humiliate me. Now I used silence to teach her. She tried to apologize, but her voice shook because it was not apology born from regret. It was apology born from loss. She was not sorry for the word useless. She was sorry for losing the money. She went to her friends. They did not laugh with her now. They looked uncomfortable, whispered, changed the subject. Some even stepped back from her because people do not like to be close to a falling star. The woman who had mocked her father was now exposed. The safety net she had counted on was gone. The wedding she had planned, the trips she had promised, the image she had built, all of it had been built on the inheritance she assumed was hers. Without it, her plans cracked. She tried to talk to relatives, but they already knew. They had seen how she treated me. They whispered among themselves about pride, about respect, about consequences. They were polite to her face, but behind her back they said the truth. She had done this to herself. Her rage turned to bargaining. She came to me late at night, tears in her eyes, voice softer, asking for one more chance. She promised she would change. She promised she would be different. She promised she would make me proud again. But I had heard promises before. Words mean little when they are only spoken after the loss. Respect given only after punishment is not respect at all. It is survival. I looked at her and said nothing. She realized then that it was too late. The papers were signed, sealed, and witnessed. Even if I wanted to change it back, it would take more than words. The fallout spread beyond money. Her friends began to drift away because she no longer looked like the woman with a guaranteed fortune. Her social circle cooled. Invitations stopped. Wedding plans slowed. Her investments began to crumble because they were built on expectations of inheritance. Without my backing, banks were not so friendly, lenders were not so kind, and people who had smiled before now avoided her. I watched all of this in silence. Not with joy, not with hate. Just with the steady knowledge that consequences had arrived. She had called me useless. She had made me a spectacle in front of strangers. She had tried to erase my worth with a word, and now she had to live in a world where that useless man had erased her from the future she counted on. I did not gloat. I did not shout. I did not point at her the way she had pointed at me. I simply let the reality stand. The law had done what it was meant to do. My decision was written on paper and sealed by signatures. She could not laugh at it. She could not erase it. She could only face it. In that fallout, I saw the power of quiet action. No shouting, no revenge in the night. Just the steady, legal removal of everything she took for granted. She had used the crowd to humiliate me. I had used the law to strip her of the crowd and the comfort that made her so bold. It was not about destroying her. It was about teaching her that words have weight and disrespect has a price. She will live with that price, and I will live with my dignity. After the truth came out, nothing was the same for her. She had built her life on the belief that my money was her future. She wore clothes she could not afford, went to dinners she could not pay for, and promised her friends trips and gifts she could never give on her own. All of it depended on the inheritance she thought was waiting. When that inheritance was gone, the mask began to crack. Her friends noticed first. They were no longer quick to call. Invitations stopped arriving. The laughter she once shared with them grew thin. People who had laughed with her at the table that night now looked at her differently. They remembered how she mocked her father, and they wondered what kind of person would do that. Some whispered behind her back. Some avoided her altogether. Her social circle shrank, leaving her alone with the weight of her choices. The wedding plans she bragged about began to collapse. Without my estate, the money she expected to use for a big ceremony was gone. The man she was planning to marry started to question her stability. His family, who had once smiled and welcomed her, now hesitated. They wanted security, not scandal. They asked questions she could not answer. They wanted guarantees she could not give. Slowly, the promises of a perfect wedding turned into arguments, delays, and finally silence. Her investments fell apart too. She had borrowed against the belief that millions would come her way. Banks and lenders had seen her last name and assumed she was safe. But when word spread that she had been cut from my will, the calls began. Bills piled up, payments were missed, interest grew heavy. What had looked like a life of comfort now looked like a trap of debt. Neighbors who once smiled at her now turned away. Family members who once praised her stopped visiting. They all knew what had happened. They all knew why. Respect does not survive when the truth is exposed. She had mocked me for being useless. Now she was the one people looked at with shame. She was the one whispered about in hallways and kitchens. I lived quietly during all of this. I did not shout about my choice. I did not stand in the street to announce it. I simply carried on with my life, knowing the papers were signed and the law was on my side. I did not need to defend myself. The truth defended me. Her own actions had built the wall that now closed her in. She tried to come back to me many times. Some days she came with anger, shouting that I had betrayed her. Some days she came with tears, begging for another chance. Some days she came with silence, sitting near me as if presence alone would fix what was broken. But nothing worked. I had given her decades of love, sacrifice, and loyalty. She had given me humiliation in front of strangers. Words like that cannot be taken back. Respect, once broken, is not rebuilt with begging. I saw her struggle, but I did not change my mind. She had to live with the result of her actions. The law had made my decision final, and I wanted it that way. I wanted her to understand that cruelty has a cost, that mocking your own father is not free. She thought one night of laughter meant nothing, but that night had written her future. The aftermath spread further than she ever imagined. Friends gone, wedding gone, investments ruined, reputation destroyed, and the inheritance she believed was her birthright erased. As for me, I felt no guilt. I lived with peace. I had acted with clarity. My $3.1 million was now secured for people and causes that would honor my life, not spit on it. I no longer worried about being mocked again. The decision was final. The woman who called me useless now walked through life exposed, carrying the weight of her own words. And I, the man she tried to erase, had already written the ending. I lived the rest of my days in silence, but it was not the silence of weakness anymore. It was the silence of justice. My decision was final, and the law stood behind it. My daughter's name was gone from my will forever. The $3.1 million I had built with sweat, blood, and sacrifice went to hands that respected me, not to the one who mocked me. The charities received their share. The nephew who had visited me when no one else did received his part. The fund for old workers who labored like I once did was created in my name. Every dollar carried meaning. Every dollar carried dignity. None of it went to her. I did not feel joy watching her struggle. I did not smile when people whispered about her downfall, but I did feel peace. She had made me a joke, but in the end, she was the one exposed. She had called me useless, but in the end, I proved that the man she mocked still had power until the last breath. She had thought I was finished, weak, forgotten, but my decision lived longer than her laughter. I walked through my house without fear now. When I sat at the dinner table, I no longer heard her voice calling me useless. I no longer saw her friends laughing at me. I replaced that memory with the image of the will, signed and sealed, sitting in the lawyer's office. That was my answer to her. That was my revenge. I did not raise my hand. I did not raise my voice. I raised a pen, and that pen cut deeper than any word she ever threw at me. Neighbors asked me once, "Do you not feel bad for her? She is your daughter." I looked at them and said nothing. Because the truth is simple. A daughter who humiliates her father is no daughter at all. Respect is the foundation of family. Without it, there is nothing. She broke that foundation. I only showed her what it cost. The years passed quietly. She tried again and again to repair what she had destroyed. She begged, she cried, she made promises. But I had already heard enough words. Words had been her weapon, and words were worthless to me now. My justice was written in ink, locked in safes, stamped with seals. Her apologies bounced off the walls of my silence. People began to understand. They saw me not as cruel, but as firm. They saw that I had defended my dignity without violence, without anger, without chaos. I had used the one thing she could never erase, the law. And the law carried my revenge beyond my lifetime. When I thought about the end, I felt no fear. I knew that when I was gone, my legacy would remain untouched. My $3.1 million would not reward cruelty. It would not feed arrogance. It would not protect disrespect. It would honor sacrifice. It would honor respect. It would honor those who knew the value of a man's life. That was my justice. My daughter called me useless in front of her friends. She laughed at me, tried to erase me, tried to make me small, but I made sure useless could no longer touch my legacy. Her name is gone from my will forever.